Okay. Okay.
So if you're recording, then you should afterwards, I mean, I don't know if it goes into my cloud onto yours.
No, it will go to mine, but I can send it to you, no problem, I think.
Yeah, then you send me the link to
Well,
that.
we can share, right?
Yes, sure. Okay, we wait, Shigui, we wait 5 minutes before you're starting your talk. You know that in Italy, we never start exactly on time. That would be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is like the Italian or Spanish way, right? Yeah, well, some of us working on delay equations anyway, right? Yeah. So how are things going in Trento? Back to normal, right? You're all back to regular schedule.
Yeah, we're back to normal, and we hope to remain there because that's, of course, the cases are increasing, and so they're adding some restrictions. So far, not for so far we're going on with the university normally, so we have all lectures in presence and things like that. So let's hope that we can continue.
Yeah, we've been teaching since August in classrooms. Yeah, for wear masks, and we have one more week of class. So hopefully we can take a break. Yeah.
So here we have more 3 or 4 weeks, I think. So.
Oh, 3 more
we have
weeks.
to arrive almost at Christmas.
Yeah, people behavior like nothing happened. You know, I went to the park. I went to the park and play soccer anyway every Saturday. Last week there were several parties. Was very large group of people. Nobody wear masks. Like nothing happened.
So you play soccer?
Yeah, I still play soccer.
Oh, very good. I didn't know you're.
I still playing, but I play from the front to the to the defender. Yeah.
I'm impressed. My last soccer match was about 15 years ago, and then
Oh.
after I decided I was too old for doing that. I was.
Well, I realized that already.
Too much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. Keep moving. Yeah.
No, that's definitely. If you're able to do it, that's great. Okay, maybe we can start with the introduction. So maybe I just say a few words in Italian and then I switch to English. Grazie a tutti, siete intervenuti per essere qua a questo che sarà il penultimo seminario della serie quest'anno. L'ultimo sarà il 15 dicembre di Vespignani e stiamo già cominciando a organizzare i prossimi, quelli dell'inizio di gennaio, per cui insomma, la nostra intenzione è di continuare, per cui grazie per l'interesse e vediamo a today there will be a talk by Shigui Ruan from the University of Miami, and Shigui Ruan I think is one of the main experts in mathematical epidemiology from the mathematical point of view, and he also he's a very good mathematician, but also worked with data and did a lot of things. I remember his work on the progenitor of COVID. He did some important work on SARS in 2004, and he also has a very impressive list of publications. So it's really an honor to have him here. And I think he started he studied in China, I think in Ruan. So now that the town that we know, the city that we know very well by now. And then he studied for the PhD at the University of Alberta with Mark Lewis or with
Herbert Friedman.
Herbert Friedman. I wasn't sure. So it was a very good school for mathematical biology, and he has been in several universities, and he's at University of Miami. He's a professor, I think, from 2005. And so it's really an honor having him here, and please, Shigui, start.
Okay, Andrea, thank you. Thank you very much. And it's very honored to give a presentation here in the Socio-Economic System Models organized by Italian Mathematical Union. It's very nice to see you guys. Today, because, you know, we have been in the pandemic like almost 2 years. In the last 2 years, I've been thinking about the models, how to model some infectious diseases, especially keep COVID-19 in mind. I found that there are many things we need to rethinking. So that's how I end up giving a talk like that, because this is basically mainly based on what I've been reading instead of what I have been working on. Okay, so some of the results, in fact, are obtained by other researchers. I just reported my understanding. Okay, so to make a so before doing that, you know, I would like to mention that I would like to quote what Newton once said. So I can calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of the men. So mathematical epidemiology is kind of subject involving human behaviors, humans, which make the life a little bit more difficult, because we have a lot of people working on mathematical physics, because physics was very well developed along by both mathematicians and physicists, because they have laws to follow. But epidemiology, biology are different, they're completely different stories, because there's no unified laws in biology or epidemiology. And the human plays a very important role there. Once the humans are involved, you know, that's a completely different story. So, for example, when we try to study any specific problems, any specific epidemic problems, we just start with the model, right? And most of the time we start with, say, for example, the so-called SVIR model, which consists of susceptible, vaccinated, infectious, and recovered individuals. I put a diagram here, and I put a simple model here, but I deliberately put general functions, say beta, instead of, you know, a beta function of T and S and I, to represent the transmission between these infectious and susceptible individuals. And also put a gamma here to indicate that it is a function of I instead of constant there. And the same thing for the vaccine. But remember, most of the time when we're working on this kind of problems, we just take it for granted that we take beta as beta times as I as using the mass action. And then gamma, because it's recovered, then, you know, when our gamma is the time of sickness, then gamma is gamma times T. And the same thing, you assume that a certain proportion of individuals are vaccinated. So we do that automatically without thinking too much. But should that be all the case? That's what I was trying to, I'm trying to explain. So I'm going to take these three functions into mind and see how to, I won't say better, I would say how to take in vaccination into consideration, how to consider the transmission rate when different things are considered. So as we know, vaccine, of course, everybody knows vaccine very well. But the main factor is that human behavior plays a very important role, because the decision whether or not to vaccine is eventually a personal decision. So it has a behavior component there, right? And the policy in most of countries are based on the voluntary compliance. If a vaccine is perceived to combine with risk or side effect, it can be presumed better to opt out and not taking the risk, right? And that's, in fact, that's what now certain people are doing. And beside the refusal of vaccine, and there are some people don't do that because religious, or some people just don't believe that, or some people just didn't know that. Okay, so the choice of a free ride is also an option for some people. And in my soccer team, in fact, that's one guy. He's not vaccinated for COVID. Everybody knows that. I think he's taking a free ride. Everybody's okay with him, you know, for my case. So if individuals decide whether to vaccine according to self-interest, the level of herd immunity achieved may differ from what is best for the population, for the whole population as a whole, right? So when we're talking about this other kind of personal decision, we needed to recall the famous fraud, research fraud on the measles, mumps, and the rubella vaccine, and the relation between the autism. Right? Some of you may know very well. So what happened is in 1998, a doctor, a former doctor from UK, his name is Wakefield. Okay, and so he published a paper in Lancet. So in the paper, they proposed a new syndrome called autistic enterocolitis, and raised the possibility of a link between a novel form of bowel disease, autism, and the MMR vaccine. Okay, and they said that the parent of 8 of the 12 children linked what they would describe as the behavior symptoms with MMR, and report that the onset of these symptoms began when 2 weeks after the vaccine. So the data set consists of 12 kids, and they reported 8 of the kids, in fact, have problems. Okay, so this is a big shock, because this, in fact, initiated this now the so-called MMR vaccine scare, and consequently, the anti-vaccine movement worldwide. Well, they were there before, but it's getting stronger after this one. Okay. And the claims in the paper were widely reported, leading to a sharp drop in the vaccine rate in the UK and also worldwide, in fact. And also because that's almost 20 years ago, right? And because at that time, the vaccine rate coverage for measles was low. So it is believed that this is the reason for the worldwide outbreak in 2019. Well, I mean, the title is in Chinese, but you can see this is the data from 2015, 2019. So in 2019, worldwide, in almost all countries, including European countries, the cases of measles almost doubled compared to the previous years. So there's a huge outbreak because very high percentage of the kids in the college kids was not vaccinated because their parents' attitude 20 years ago. Okay. So interesting, going back to the paper, the report, the link was not able to reproduce it by other, was unable to observe it by other researchers. So then reporters and also the journal and the medical council start to investigate this guy. The investigation found that, in fact, this guy had multiple undeclared conflicts of interest because he got money from other people. And he had manipulated the data because, in fact, he had 12 kids and 4 had problems. But 5 of the kids he recruited had autism already because he manipulated the data. Also, he broke other ethical codes. Okay, so after 12 years, in 2010, Lancet retracted the paper. So in the same year, he was found guilty by the UK General Medical Council for serious professional misconduct, and his license was scratched off. So basically, he cannot practice as a doctor in UK anymore. Okay, but however, the damage was done already. You know, the worldwide anti-vaccine movement already started and continued to now. Okay, and in fact, it was characterized as perhaps the most damaging medical hoax of the last 100 years. Because in fact, the anti-vaccine argument in books by celebrities and politicians are still circulating in the Facebook and Google and Amazon, including our former leaders. Okay, and there's many big names. They still have anti-vaccine argument and books. Okay, and this continue toward the COVID vaccines. Because I show you here. So this is the data from the NPR and the PBS, the news report. So they surveyed, they pulled about 1,241 US adults continuously. The question was that if a vaccine for COVID is available to you, will you choose the vaccine or not? They started from December to 2000. At that time, the vaccine was not available yet. So you can see 60% of people says, yes, I will definitely do it. But there were about 10% people, I'm not sure, yeah. And more than 30% people said, no, I will not. And the more than 30% people, they persist. So in September, there's still 20% saying, no, I will not do that. But on the other hand, the unsure people change a little bit, but most people believe they will do, they do it. They did, okay. So you can see the vaccine rate was high in September. So here, there's still around 20% people say, I won't do it, and that, in fact, that's what happened. So I'll show you some interesting story here. So this is, so in August, there were, the pandemic here was very bad, very serious, okay? You will read news about how many people die every day, and most people, you won't know the name. But there were a couple of cases, in fact, the names was on the newspaper. For example, this guy, that's August the 7th, okay? The title says, the Florida man's funeral becomes COVID vaccine event after death from Delta variant. The guy was 28, 7 years old. He passed away in July. Of course, he didn't vaccine at the time. So he passed away. So his family decided, well, then we have a funeral for him. How about we just organize an event for him, right? So some people got a vaccine, during the service, suggested by his wife and the church. But this report didn't say how many people, in fact, were vaccinated. I think it is about 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, there's another news in the newspaper. It's that 94 people, in fact, got a vaccine at the clinic after the funeral of a police guy. In fact, the guy is 32. I think he is 32. He had 5 kids, and unfortunately he was not vaccinated. So again, his family and the church organized a kind of event. So say everybody came here for the funeral. If they're not vaccinated, we offer vaccine for them. So this is a big shock for those people who were not vaccinated. This is also linked to what I'm going to talk about later on. The psychological effect is huge. If you go to a friend's funeral and the friend died because not vaccinated, you are not vaccinated. So I don't know how those people feel, but it looks at there are some effects there. People, 94 people in fact turned out to be vaccinated afterwards. So in fact, in Florida, this is still a problem because politically, because the governor has a different opinion about the vaccine. So this is the data from our county, the Miami-Dade County. Okay, so that's the data from the beginning of the pandemic. So you have one wave with the second wave, and this is the third wave. That's what we're talking about. So the bars indicating the number of people who are vaccinated. Okay, so now you can, in the last 7 days, the average is still more than 200 people on severity. That means there are more than 240 people got infected in the last 7 days. So in our county, we have like 2.7 million, like almost 0.7 million got infected. The death is 9,000. So we still do have people not vaccinated. Okay. So this is a big brings us to talking about the game theory. So a very important concept is the Nash equilibrium point. So in game theory, the Nash equilibrium is the most common way to define the solution for a non-competitive, remember, it's a non-competitive game involving 2 or more players. Each player is assumed to know the equilibrium strategy for the other players, and no player has anything to gain by changing. If everybody agrees to something, and then you decide to change, but you will not gain anything, then this strategy is called Nash equilibrium, right? The most famous example is the prisoner's dilemma, right? So if, for example, you have 2 persons, A and B, suspect of committing a robbery, okay? They are isolated and they are argued to confess. Each concerned any with getting to the shortest possible prison sentence for himself. And each must decide whether to confess without knowing the other's decision. And both know the consequence of their decision. First, if they both confess, and both were jailed for 5 years. If neither confess, then of course they jail for 1 year because they robbed it anyway. They got it. They caught it. If one confesses while the other does not, then the confessor get free and the silent one get the jail for 20 years. So the best, of course, you seem that I don't say anything, but the other guy, confess. But you don't depend on others' choice. So the best so the solution will be that each person does best to confess and go to jail for 5 years. So when each of the 2 acts selfishly and does not cooperate with the others, they do worse when they do change. Okay, so this is they reach a Nash equilibrium by this. That's why this is called a non-cooperative. If they do not cooperative, they save their best interests. So in 2004. Bouch and Earn, David Byrne, Chris Bouch and David Earn published a paper in PNAS by incorporating the game theory, or especially the Nash equilibrium point into a epidemic model. But keep in mind, at that time, the MMR scuff was there, so the research was more served on that purpose to answer the UK scandal. So the vaccine game has each member of the population of N players strategy a vaccine with a probability of P. Okay, so P is the vaccine probability. So the ratio of perceived mobility risk from infection risk to the risk associated with vaccine is denoted by R and assume the constant. So that means there's a possibility to be sick once you vaccine, but also there's a possibility to be sick without vaccine. So this is the ratio. Okay, of course we're gonna mention that later on. Of course, if this R is greater than 1, of course probably that's not good idea to do vaccine. If this R is less than 1, of course it's a good idea to vaccine. Now. P pi is very important. It represents the risk of infection if a fraction of P of the population is vaccinated. For example, say 30%, then that's P30, right? And the expected payoff an individual playing strategy P is that. So you have negative RP because this is the risk minus the risk of infection if not vaccinated. Okay, so just like this is the expected payoff. Now, this strategy P is a Nash equilibrium if no players can improve their payoffs by switching to a different strategy Q. Okay, of course, that's what we mentioned. Suppose that a proportion or a fraction of epsilon, fraction of the population vaccinates with the probability P, and the remainder vaccine was the probability Q. Then the overall coverage is epsilon times P plus 1 minus epsilon times Q, because that's the 2 strategies. So then the payoff gain to an individual playing P in such a population is So you can see this is going to the probability of epsilon times p. This is the whole p is here in the subscripts here. That's the p minus the risk times the p minus q. So that's the payoff for any individual playing a probability p. So the gain will be the difference. The gain, this is the gain. The gain is a measurement for the insensitive of an individual to change from schedule Q to P. So if you change from Q to P, that's the benefit that you're going to get. Okay. So for any given risk R, there is a unique schedule P, which is not equal to P star, such that the delta E is positive. If it's positive, then of course you have a good strategy. If of course. And that's for all epsilon between 0 and 1. Okay. So now, so this is how to evaluate this one. So then what did they do? They incorporate this strategy into the epidemic model. So you have the standard SIR, but the vaccine is here. So 1 minus P here. So mu is the person death rate. Beta is the transmission rate. We knew that. 1 hour gamma is the infectious period, and P is the vaccine uptake level, it's the coverage level, right? So the basic number is very well studied, very well understood, which is beta over gamma plus mu. So the critical average coverage level to eliminate the disease, of course, is when R0 is less than or equal to 1, of course, it's going to be 0. When R0 is greater than 1, is 1 over R0. So that's how we calculate the percentage of vaccine for eliminating, right? So for example, for COVID-19, we estimate that's roughly 80%. So plugging into the probability of infection, p pi, we just mentioned in previous slides. So the probability that the unvaccinated individual becomes infected is p pi, which is 1 minus 1 over R0, 1 times 1 minus P. This is P is the vaccine uptake rate. Okay, so that's what we have. So we can find the Nash equilibrium points here, equilibrium for this problem now. Now first, P0, that means nobody vaccinated, right? That's the, if nobody's vaccinated, what is the probability you got infected? Right, got sick. If R is greater than that, of course, nobody will vaccine, right? So you don't need to vaccine because there's more risk. The vaccine is more risk. Now, if R is less than P naught, then you obtain a Nash equilibrium P star. P star is the one we mentioned here, but the small p replaced by small r. So the R now plays a very important role here. As I mentioned, R is the ratio of you get sick because of vaccine, or you get sick because you're not vaccinated. So this is very important. Okay. Now, if R is greater than 0, so that means it's almost impossible to eradicate the disease through voluntary vaccination. Now, if R is greater than 1, as I mentioned already, that means you are more risky to be sick when you're vaccinated. Of course, nobody will take the vaccine. So the only possibility is R is less than 1. So after vaccine, so if R is less than 1, then you can see here, if there's a vaccine scale, okay, then even you tried very little, very aggressively, very hard, or very difficult to recover the coverage level before discovery. So that's what exactly for the measles, because the scandal, many people didn't. And then it takes years to back to the previous level before 1998. So in fact, there are people was partially try to understand the vaccine scandal on measles. Okay, so this is interesting. But what I was trying to say here is that, you know, when we try to model the infection disease, if vaccine is available, then maybe the vaccination rate is not automatically a constant times S. Okay, in fact, there's many papers, a very large number of papers on this aspect. I mentioned a few here, and also there's one of the paper published in another paper published in PNAS by the same group by Bauch and David and Galvani. So they assume that, so they end up arguing that the vaccinated function instead is a step function. Okay, and also there are some people by the Italian researchers right here in the theoretical population biology, and there's a very interesting survey here, very long survey here, a review, more than 100 pages. The title is Statistical Physics of Vaccination. Also, recently there's a manuscript by Wendy Wang, as a Chinese researcher. The tentative title is Vaccine Games in Preventing Infectious Diseases with Application to COVID. So they argue that the vaccine function, in fact, takes a very complicated form here, and they have some data to support that. They have to consider the vaccine efficiency and the vaccine rate per unit time, and the forced vaccine, voluntary vaccine, and so on. So a combination of that. So my message is that, well, maybe next time when we try to model infectious disease with the vaccine available, maybe we needed to think about the vaccine function, whether it's a step function, is just a linear function, or it's a combination. Okay. So this is the first topics. Okay. The second one is social inequality in infectious disease. Social inequality occurs everywhere. It could be a hierarchy of class, races, and gender that unequally distribute access to the source and rights, because you have different qualities to access to source and rights. Maybe then medically is very natural, right? Social inequality is characterized by the existence of unequal opportunities and reward for different social positions or status within the group of society. It contains structured and recurrent patterns of unequal distribution of good, wealth, opportunities, reward, and punishment, including access to public health. So infections are also distributed unevenly throughout the society, in which vulnerable people bear a disproportional burden. So there's many examples. For example, in Africa, for example, talking about malaria, the rich families were able to buy bed nets, right? And they were able to access service and doctors and so on. So of course they have better opportunities. This is well documented. And also in another research talking about studying the hepatitis B in China, I found out that in fact in 1992, the Minister of Health in China recommended the vaccine for all infants. However, at that time, all the parents have to pay like 159 yuan, and then that caused a big problem, because in the eastern part of China, like Shanghai, like Guangdong, and the coastal areas, those families were relatively rich. 150 yuan for the family was not a big deal. But for the families living in the middle and west part, 159 yuan at that time is a big money. So many families was not able to offer the vaccine. It caused a problem 20 years later, because the incidence rate in the east were low, but in the middle and west part it was much higher. This is totally inequality. Of course, the government realized the problem. They were free, I think, starting from 2002, and from 2009 and 2011, the government decided to retroactively immunize the young people who were not vaccinated. But the damage was caused already. The problem was a problem already. Also, there's another example here. In fact, there's a review published in the Norwegian Medical Journal, which studied the 2019-2009 influenza pandemic in EU, in United States, Canada, Australia, in all the industrial countries. And the study shows that the poorest suffer the highest risk of infection and of having a severe disease, okay, for this COVID, for the flus. And also for the COVID-19, there were many papers. In fact, I mentioned two. One was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Another one was published in Nature, and showing that the poor, the certain immigrant groups, the Black people and certain Native people, once again, are paying the highest cost during this COVID-19. Of course, the coronavirus, in fact, every people, no matter you are rich, you are noble, you are poor, like, you know, like the leaders of some industrial countries, like the UK, the United States, they got infected, but they had a better access to be, they were better treated, right? I mean, so that you see the inequality here. So going back to the diagram here, so how to incorporate the social inequality into the model? Honestly, I don't know. I've been thinking about that. I have no idea how to do that. How to study the impact of the social inequality on the spread, the prevention and control of infectious disease. And as I mentioned, even how about we start from here? So some people are infected. If you're richer, you can access to medicine right away, or you can see doctors right away. But if you are poor, like the COVID, you are poor, you will stay longer. So you can see this function is no longer a constant times in the number of infectives. Maybe that depends on social economic status. It depends on how rich you are, right? Honestly, I don't have a conclusion for this one. Maybe I mentioned one example for you. A few years later, our team at the University of Miami had an NIH project studying the vector-borne diseases in the Middle East. So the problem we picked is the Rift Valley fever. And we try to study the effect of the seasonality and socioeconomic studies. Okay, this was published in the plus and negative tropic disease. So most people, maybe you know the Rift Valley fever, right? So this is a viral zoonosis and disease, and in fact, it's an animal disease because most animals are like cattle, sheep, camels, and goats are infected. But humans also got infected, but most of the time humans do not spread it to other humans. And this virus was initially identified in the Rift Valley volcano in 1931. And so it's named there, but now we don't do that anymore. So there are many outbreaks reported in sub-Saharan Africa, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, and so on. So the virus, in fact, is transmitted by mosquitoes, okay, and several species like Corax and Aedes, okay. As I mentioned, human can be infected, but they don't transmit any further. So there were 5 major outbreaks co-signed with either the pink seasons of mosquitoes or the timing of the greater Bering, the Bering, right? The Adaha festival, right? This is called the Festival of Sacrifice. This is the largest Islam festival, which is a large number of livestock are driven to the fest. So what happened is in these countries, the outbreak may occur when the disease is introduced by importation and transportation of infected animals. So each year, there were a very large number of animals imported through the Nile River from Sudan to Egypt and then to Saudi Arabia. So this is very large activities. And interesting, this festival is on the 10th day of the 12th month of the Islam lunar calendar. So it created a particular periodicity for the timing, because in our normal calendar we have 365 days, but the Islam, they have 355 days. So that's what you see. That's a cycle there. In their calendar, they cycle in the normal calendar. So the two events will coincide perfectly every 33.5 years. So as I mentioned, the large number of animals will travel by the humans through the Nile rivers. this is all interesting because how you're gonna contribute to animals, that depends on your social activity, so your socioeconomic status. The richer family contribute more. The poor family contributes less. If you are completely poor, if you don't have anything, you contribute to your labors, or you don't contribute anything. Okay, and also when they distribute the food, everybody they equal. So this is a social problem, religious event, but also is a socioeconomic events. Okay, very interesting, in fact. So as I mentioned, in fact, a few years earlier, I mean, one of my former students, Dr. Gao, constructed a three-patch model. So you have three patches from Sudan to Egypt to Saudi Arabia, right? And you have the movement animals. So in the people I mentioned here, then we consider the same structure, but we assume that the movement are almost periodical, but also there are socioeconomic factors along the three patches along the Nile rivers and eventually to there. Because as I mentioned, because their periodicity is different from the annual periodicity we are talking about. So you have very interesting dynamics. So you can see you have in fact, animals in different patches, you have different periodicity, and also if when you're going to start. So usually when you reach the destination for the festival, you need the time. Okay, if you start earlier, you stay more time on the road, or you start later. So in other words, the date of preparations also plays important roles. Okay, and very interesting dynamics. Okay, so let me just skip that. So in this study, we proposed an almost periodical three-patch model to study the problem. Okay, so our finding indicates that so in the Northeast Africa, the human activities, including those associated with the festival of sacrifice, along with the combination of climate factors such as the rainfall level, the socioeconomic factors, and then also the hydrology variations contributed to transmission and the movement of the disease. So, so this is interesting. Of course, you have to combine maybe two factors. For example, that then the lipsticks are recruited into the area, and also you have a large number of mosquitoes at that time around. So that contributed to the outbreaks. So this, yeah, and for the second part, I don't have an idea how to incorporate problem, but I think this is important. This is a real phenomenon there. Okay, the last part, let me briefly mention the psychological fact. In fact, everyone knows the Kaposo, right? Kaposo. Okay, so in 1978, Kaposo and Searle published a paper in the Mathematical Biosciences. So after studying the cholera spread in Bari in 1973, they introduced a saturated incidence rate. It's not a mass action, it's a GFI times S into the epidemic model to describe the crowd effect or the protection measurement. Moreover, they introduce a phenomenon that is called psychological effect. For example, if there's a very large number of infected individuals reported by the newspaper, now of course everybody take care. In fact, the number of infected individuals increases, but maybe the interaction decreases because everybody is kind of laid back, right? You try not to go somewhere you used to go, right? So this is very interesting. And as I mentioned, like a COVID-19, like this psychological factor certainly plays a factor for everybody's activities, right? So in their paper, in fact, they use this figure to describe these psychological facts. So when the number of infectives was not so large, the infection rate, in fact, increases. But when they reach a certain level, or when the news reports more and more infected individuals, infected numbers, data, and the infection rate decreases. So they said that this function takes into account the psychological fact, right? But somehow they did not give any specific function to describe the psychological fact. So that's how I try to understand the problem. So my original thought is how to characterize the psychological fact using a specific function, and what is the impact of the dynamics of the model. And to study that, I did some research. In fact, in 1986, Liu, Levin, Iwasa published a paper in Journal of Mathematical Biology. They proposed a very general function here, takes this form. Also, this is GFI times S. So that's the format which is similar to the one we mentioned in the previous slide. But the specific function takes the form here. So you have k times I to the power L times S, or 1 plus alpha times I to the power H. Now, interesting, in the first figure, now, say, for example, if the power in the numerator, L is 2, the power here is 1. So in other words, the power for I in the numerator is higher in the power in the denominator, then this is just like a mass action, right? This is just increasing function. Now, if the two powers are equal, say, for example, in the second figure, if L equals H equals 2, then you can see the increase in the saturated. So that's why some people say this is a saturated infection rate, incident function. But somehow there's a third case. Now, if the power here is lower, L is smaller than H, for example, L equals 1, H equals 2, then you can see the function in fact increases and then decreases. So then we thought, maybe we can choosing a function to describe the psychological fact, right? So that's what we did in some years back in 2007. My collaborator Dongmei Xiao and I published a paper in 2007. Okay, so we just because we just did that kind of try to pick a function which satisfies geographically shows the same figure as the one in Capasso's paper. We use this function, KIS over 1 plus alpha I square. Well, here, KI measures the infection force of disease, and then the fraction measures the psychological effect, okay, from the behavior change. So you consider SIR model with this function. Of course, you can construct, you find the basic product number. But the dynamics turns out pretty trivial because you have a disease equilibrium point which is globally stable when the R0 is less one. Otherwise, it's going to be stable. So if you have any interest in the mass or stability, let's say. But biologically interesting, the K and L I mentioned, it plays very, because the alpha plays here. The alpha describes the psychological fact. But in the figure here, when alpha changes, you can see the number of infectious individuals change dramatically. So in fact, you can see the psychological factor maybe it does not change the dynamics as fancily as you think, but it will affect the outcomes. The number of infectious will be changing if everybody takes actual cautious, or in other words, the psychological factor does impact the outbreaks. Recently, we just published another paper in the Journal of Differential Equations. Well, in this function, the power in the numerator and in the denominator are the same, but we do have a linear term in the denominator. But of course, you need to make sure that the beta is greater than this number. But somehow, if you change the beta differently, this function have different shapes. So when beta equals 1, it's increasing and saturated, but also increasing and start decreasing if beta is negative, but not too negative. Okay, in other words, you have a function like that. Well, it turns out if you have a function like that, because you can see the number of equilibriums is going to change dramatically. This model has very complicated dynamics. So because there is a weak focus of multiplicity at most 2, and there's a cost for codependent 2. And the model undergoes statinol bifurcations, Bagnanov takes bifurcations, codamin 2 hop bifurcation, even degenerate hop bifurcations. So that means you need 2 parameters determined by the behaviors. And it turned out the model could have 2 limit cycles, okay? 2 limit cycles. I don't know how to interpret that epidemiologically, is complicated. And also in another paper just published in JDDE, this is completely mathematical. So if the power in the numerator is 1, the denominator is a quadratic form here. And this model gonna have 3 limit cycles, okay? So from the point of view of dynamics or mathematics, it's interesting, okay? It's complicated. So anyhow, so also in the paper here, in that paper published in the Journal of Differential Equation, we apply the model to simulate the data from China, talking about influenza. Every year we have the influenza, but at the end of the year, then you have a lot of data and a lot of news talking about the flu seasons. So the table shows the data, and this is the parameter. We try to estimate the parameter and then simulate the data, and we kind of predict the trajectory. And so it's increasing. Okay, it's increasing. Okay. So anyhow, so to summary here, as I mentioned, I try to report what I've been learning on the impact of the human behaviors and social factors, and found out that in fact they do play important roles in the spread and the infection. And this certainly will be helpful if we can take these factors into consider. And also I included some recent studies on the influence of the human behavior and social factor on the diseases. And also I mentioned Chris Bouch and David Ernst's idea by combining the national equilibrium strategy into the epidemics. And also I mentioned the social inequalities and the psychological factors. But as I mentioned at the beginning, as Newton says that when you consider the humans' social behaviors, there's no unique way to set up the model. Okay, there are different ways to interpret it. And most important, maybe we needed to combine with the data, which brings another important aspect of modeling and studying infectious disease. There are many other ways to study. For example, your group, right, published a very interesting paper talking about spontaneous behavior changes in response to epidemics. What in your model you suggested the incident rate, in fact, is a combination of 2. Right? One is voluntary, another is kind of not voluntary to do that, right? So that I think that's also a good idea to model the behavior change. And there's a very large number of papers on modeling, okay, and very few, in fact, with data. So this is I would say this is a very challenging problem, very interesting problem, a very realistic problem. Okay, so I think I can stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Shigui, for the very interesting talk that went into several different aspects of epidemic and behavior. So the floor is open for questions. If somebody wants to ask a question, just unmute himself or herself or ask, or raise their hand.
Andrea,
sure.
Here is Bruno Bonomo. May I
Please, Bruno, go ahead.
make a comment? So first of all, I want to say thank you to Professor Ruan for this very nice survey on the epidemic models that includes human behavior. I want just to make a comment because I see that there is something missing which may be of some interest for you and for the audience, because you mentioned the approach by Capasso and Serio in 1978. So the idea to consider a nonlinear force of infection. And probably you know that this kind of approach has been generalized in some sense by using what is called the information index. So the information index is a sort of a generalization of that force of infection, which is also mentioned in the survey that you also mentioned, the statistics physics of vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
And the information index may be a way to represent the fear of individuals regarding the prevalence in the population, but may also represent the behavioral changes that comes from other data. For example, quarantined people or people that are hospitalized or something like that. So in the last 15 years, we published several contributions in this direction. And it would be interesting to observe that from one hand, the use of the information index may produce a very important change in the dynamics of the systems. For example, it may be responsible of oscillations, because the information index take account of the memory of the population regarding the status of the disease inside the population. So according to how you describe the memory, so if it is, for example, exponentially fading, or you have another kind of distribution of memory, like RNA distribution, you can have oscillations. So this means that the oscillations are intrinsically related to the population and not to the disease. And from another hand, we also tried to represent the situation in Italy during the lockdown by using official data. So it is true that very often these kind of models that are related to human behavior are not associated with the data. But I mean, that study on lockdown in Italy represents, from my point of view, the first time that that kind of approach by using the information index is related on field data. So this is more or less a comment to see that there are also other point of view about this kind of story that can produce important changes in the dynamics of the system.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. In fact, you know, I knew some of the work there, and then I thought of putting it in, but I do have 3 topics already. It's just yeah, this is very interesting because you the index kind of give you a way to describe the the effect, the kind of feeling, and that's very helpful. I will follow. I mean, maybe the audience will follow your results. I know some of the results. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there other questions, please? Well, I have more a curiosity than a real question. In the beginning, you showed the data on COVID in Florida. And somehow they have a very different seasonal pattern from the ones that we know that we see in Italy, because you seem to have the peaks in summer, in July, August. Or while we tend to have just the opposite in Italy, so that the incidence was low over the summer and then started increasing as we get into the fall. You have any idea why this happens? What was there peculiar?
No. I think here, I shouldn't say that because I think this is more political here. I think, the state, the government of the state has a very interesting attitude toward the disease. The policies made by the states and the policies by the county are all different, conflict each other. Maybe you read it, you saw the pictures last year in the Miami Beach. One side of the beach that's very crowded. The other one is empty because two different countries have different policies. One is locked down, the other is open. So this is a very interesting place. You have different policies. The county policy is different from the state. The county policy, the policy in this county is different from the other counties. So I think again, this is against human behavior. Maybe more political behavior affects the patterns. I would say is that's more than the epidemic regulation mechanics. There's other factors there.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions?
May I?
Might have one, Andrea.
Okay, well, there are two. One ask, I don't know, Pierre or whatever. I missed, who was the other one?
Mismo. No, Marino, sorry.
I know.
Go, Pierre.
You may go first, no problem.
Okay, if I may go first.
Sure.
What if the perceived risk is related more to deaths instead of, say, the risk of getting infected? And do you think that it would be possible to include in the game theoretical approach, for instance, well, at least roughly age, because clearly the risk for older ages is higher, especially if you consider the deaths instead of.
In fact, I've been thinking about that, but I haven't seen anybody did that. Certainly, just say, for example, if we started with an age structure model, and also we incorporate the Nash equilibrium idea into there, maybe we could incorporate there. Then I don't know the outcome. Maybe there's a way to do that. Yeah, I thought about that. In fact, I did thought about that because I've been working on age structure models, and maybe that is way. But here, they only talking about the risk, not talking about the death yet. But if we have death, there's more. I mean, there might be the message is.
Yes, but it depends what is the perceived risk.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
But so I have a question exactly on this slide because I don't understand. You don't have any vaccination in your model, right?
No.
So how can you conclude anything about? I don't get the point. In fact, with
no. The P described the vaccine coverage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's in there, implicitly there.
Right.
Yeah, they don't have a specific class for vaccine.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, that is to us. That's the mu term represent what? Represents the in the S equation. The mu term without vaccination would represent what?
The mu is the birth and the death.
Right.
So the system is balanced.
Well, will be the birth basically, right?
Yeah. Right.
So
yeah.
Okay, that's a sort of okay. So,
by the way, this is Chris Bouch and David Ernst's paper. You know, I just read it and interpret it.
No, I just didn't get the.
Yeah.
The
it's not easy. It took me 2 days to read their paper. It's not easy to understand them. You know.
So the point is, you want to vaccinate the newborn basically, and discuss the Nash equilibrium with the newborn, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I think they really try to say they try to show that in fact the UK MMR scandal really damaging because the last conclusion here, as mentioned, after vaccine scare, even I put it Chinese because I want to remind myself what I'm talking about. You know, after vaccine scare, even if a perceived vaccine risk is greatly reduced, it will be relatively difficult to restore pre-scare vaccine coverage levels. So that's exactly for measles. Okay, I think that's what they were trying to demonstrate.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Maybe there is time for last question, and then maybe we can Well, go to. Okay. If not, then thanks again, Shigui, and thanks to everybody who has followed this seminar. And so have a good evening to the people in Italy or France, and have a good afternoon for Shigui in Florida.
Yeah, we are. So we have the Thanksgiving. So today
it's Thanksgiving. No, it's tomorrow Thanksgiving. So
wow,
you're ready for Thanksgiving, I see.
Yeah. Okay.
So have a nice vacation then.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Very nice to see you guys, and I really appreciate it. And then I watch the European soccer, the Italian soccer every week. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Good
That's
night.
all for
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Bye. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So, Andrea,
Yes.
I stop here.
Yes.
I think,
Stop, and then if you